She came to the well alone because everyone avoided her. But that day, Jesus was already waiting, and one conversation would change her life forever. Dust hangs suspended in the thick, dry air, catching the light like gold grit. Everywhere, the sound of commerce dominates. The rhythmic clatter of clay jars against stone. The sharp, overlapping calls of merchants hawking grain and oil. And the frantic, high-pitched laughter of children darting through the narrow alleys. It is a symphony of routine, a place where every movement serves a purpose. People press together in the shade of the awnings, trading coins and news, with a familiarity that binds them into a single, breathing entity. The scent of crushed herbs and parched earth clings to the walls. Yet, this vibrancy has a sharp edge. The crowd moves with a collective intent, flowing around obstacles and individuals alike. The marketplace is a machine of belonging, and it is designed to filter out anything that does not fit its rhythm. She moves through the periphery, a ghost in the machinery of the market. Her gaze remains fixed on the dust, tracking the uneven stones beneath her feet to avoid the eyes of those she passes. Every step is calculated. When a group of men blocks the narrow passage, she does not ask them to move. She presses her back against the rough limestone wall, letting them pass with a wide, deliberate berth. They do not acknowledge her presence, their voices continuing without a stutter, as if she were merely part of the architecture. She keeps her head tilted down, her jaw set, and her stride tight and rhythmic. There is a weight in the way she carries herself, a tension in her shoulders that suggests she is bracing for an impact that never comes. Or perhaps one that has already left its mark. She avoids the center of the path, clinging to the shadows cast by the overhanging eaves. The marketplace noise begins to fade behind her. The town walls fall away, and the narrow, protective shadows of the alleys vanish. She steps into the open expanse where the desert sun strikes the ground with relentless force. The heat rises in shimmering waves from the limestone, blurring the horizon and turning the earth to a pale, cracked white. There is no cover here. She walks with her head bowed, shielding her eyes from the glare. Her pace, steady and mechanical. The silence of the desert is absolute, a stark contrast to the distant, muffled hum of the marketplace she has left behind. Every footfall kicks up a fine, choking grit that clings to her skin. Ahead, the landscape flattens into a vast, empty basin. She reaches the crest of a low ridge, and there it sits, the structure of Jacob's well. It stands alone in the center of the basin. She stops at the edge of the well, the weight of her burden pulling at her shoulders, and looks down into the dark, silent depth. She is finally, completely alone. She sets her empty jar on the stone rim with a sharp, hollow clack. The sound echoes against the dry basin walls. She reaches for the rope, her fingers calloused and steady, ready to begin the familiar, repetitive labor of drawing water from the depths. Then, she stops. Her hand hovers over the frayed hemp. In the narrow sliver of shade cast by the well structure, a man sits. He is motionless. His presence is not the aggressive intrusion of a traveler seeking shelter, but a stillness that seems to command the air. She draws her hand back, her muscles tightening as she shifts her weight to retreat. She had expected the basin to be empty. The man does not look up, yet the way he sits suggests he is entirely aware of her arrival. The heat continues to vibrate off the limestone. She stands frozen, the rope dangling between them, her defensive instincts firing in the sudden, unexpected proximity. He remains seated, a figure of calm in the blinding glare, waiting for the moment to break the stillness. The man lifts his head. His eyes meet hers, steady and unblinking. He does not offer the customary nod or the averted gaze of a stranger. Instead, he speaks. "Give me a drink." The words hang in the dry, stagnant air, stripped of any preamble or polite hesitation. The woman recoils, her heels digging into the loose dust. She stares at him, her breath hitching in her throat. The request is a violation. It ignores the chasm between their people, the centuries of silence that dictate they should not even share the same shadow, let alone a vessel. She looks at the well, then back at him, searching for the mockery or the malice she expects to find. His face remains neutral, his hand gesturing slightly toward the jar. The silence of the desert, once a sanctuary, now feels like a cage. She grips the edge of her jar, her knuckles turning white against the clay. How is it that you, a man of your people, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Her voice is thin, sharp, and laced with the instinct to push him away. She waits for him to retract the request, to acknowledge the boundary he has just crossed. He does not move. He remains seated, waiting. He does not look away. He does not acknowledge the insult in her tone. Instead, his gaze shifts slightly, as if looking through the stone rim of the well towards something far beneath the earth. If you knew the gift of God, and who it is that is asking you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. The words land with a strange, heavy resonance. She blinks, her grip on the clay jar loosening. Living water? The phrase makes no sense in the heat of the midday sun. She looks down into the dark, circular throat of the well, then back at his face. She takes a half step back, her boots scuffing the dry earth. "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep," she says. "Where do you get this living water?" She gestures toward the bucket, the rope, the physical tools of her daily labor. The air feels thinner, charged with a meaning she cannot yet name, and for the first time, the heat of the noon sun seems to lose its bite. She crosses her arms, the clay of the jar pressing against her side. She needs this to be a trick. She needs him to be a fool, or a liar, or someone seeking a coin. "Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself?" She throws the question at him like a stone, hoping to shatter the calm that surrounds him. He does not flinch. He watches her with a patience that feels like a physical weight. "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again," he says, his voice steady, rhythmic, cutting through the dry hum of the insects. "But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again." She shifts her weight, her toes digging into the limestone dust. She wants to walk away, but her feet remain planted. The logic of the marketplace feels suddenly fragile. She looks at the water jar, then back to his steady, unblinking eyes. The defiance in her chest is still there, but it is quieter now. She is beginning to wonder if there is anything left to defend. She opens her mouth to demand he stop, to tell him he has no right to speak of such things, but the words die in her throat. He does not raise his voice. He does not point a finger. He simply speaks, and with every sentence, the walls she has built around her life for years begin to crumble. He mentions the men she has known, the sequence of her failures, the quiet, aching reality of her isolation. He names the invisible burden she has carried through the marketplace, the one she hides beneath a hardened face and a quick, sharp tongue. She stands frozen. The heat of the sun seems to vanish, replaced by a sudden, chilling clarity. She looks at him, searching for a trace of the judgment she has faced in every alleyway of Sychar, but finds only a profound, steady focus. He is not looking at her mistakes. He is looking at her. The air between them vibrates with the weight of his words. Her hands tremble, and she lets the edge of her jar slip, the clay scraping against the stone rim with a harsh, jarring sound. The silence of the well is absolute. She stares at the water, seeing her own reflection distorted by the ripples, but she does not look away. Every memory he touched, the failed promises, the long nights of solitude, the stinging whispers of the marketplace rises to the surface. She waits for the sting of shame, the familiar reflex to pull away and hide, but it does not come. Instead, there is a hollow space where the bitterness used to be. She looks at his hands, then back to his face, searching for the flicker of disgust she has memorized from the eyes of her neighbors. It is absent. He is looking at her with a clarity that strips away the years of defensive armor. She feels the heat of the noon sun on her shoulders, but it no longer burns. She tries to speak, to ask how he could know, but her voice is thin, caught in the sudden rush of air in her lungs. The world around the well seems to shrink until there is only this exchange. She is being dismantled, piece by piece, and for the first time, she does not reach out to hold the fragments together. She simply breathes, letting the truth settle into the dust at her feet. The glare of the noon sun seems to hold its breath, casting long, sharp shadows across the limestone. She stands on the edge of the well, her knuckles white as she grips the rough stone. The choice hangs in the air between them, heavier than the water jars she has hauled for years. To remain in the shadow of her past is to stay safe in her familiar rejection, but to step forward is to abandon the only identity she has ever known. She looks at the dust, then at his steady, waiting gaze. Every instinct screams at her to run, to retreat into the narrow alleys of Sykar, where she is defined by her failures. Yet, the silence of the well offers something else. It offers a path where the weight of her history is no longer a requirement for existence. She feels the tension in her shoulders begin to slacken. She is standing on a precipice, the old world pulling at her heels, while the promise of a new reality beckons. She draws a long, ragged breath. She lets go of the stone. She is ready to leave the shame behind. The final knot of her resistance unspools. She looks up, and for the first time, she does not search for judgment in his eyes. She finds only a mirror of her own worth, steady and unblinking. The years of rejection, the labels pressed upon her by the town, the cold distance of the marketplace, all of it dissolves like salt in a deep pool. She feels a sudden, sharp lightness in her chest, as if a physical weight has been cut from her shoulders. The air around the well seems to brighten, the harsh noon light losing its edge, turning into a soft, golden clarity. She is no longer the woman who walked to the well in silence, hiding from the world. She is someone else, someone seen for the first time in her entirety. The history that once felt like a prison wall is now nothing more than dust on the ground. She stands tall, her breath coming deep and easy. The fear that kept her tethered to her past is gone, replaced by a quiet, steady pulse of belonging. The transformation is complete. She glances down at the clay jar resting near her feet. For years, this vessel was her constant companion, the heavy weight she carried through the heat of every day. It was the mark of her routine, the tool of her isolation, and the container for the water she needed to survive. Now, it looks different. The rough surface, the chipped rim, the dried mud on its base, it all belongs to a woman who no longer exists. She reaches out, her fingers brushing the cool, baked earth of the rim. She could pick it up. She could hoist it onto her shoulder and return to the path she has walked 1,000 times before. But the thought feels foreign, like a memory from a life lived by someone else. She pulls her hand back. The jar remains in the dust, a silent, hollow relic of a finished chapter. She stands up, her hands empty and light. She does not look back at the well. She does not reach for the handle. She turns away, leaving the vessel behind in the dry, sun-baked earth. The jar sits alone in the dirt, abandoned, while she walks forward into the silence of the afternoon, unburdened and finally free of the weight she carried for so long. The first step was tentative, but the second was a stride. She began to move, not with the measured defensive pace of an outcast, but with the raw, driving energy of someone who has found a treasure. She hit the path, her boots kicking up plumes of dry white dust. The heat of the afternoon sun pressed against her back, but she did not slow. She accelerated. Her breath came in sharp, rhythmic gasps that matched the pounding of her heart. She sprinted past the gnarled olive trees, her arms pumping, her gaze locked on the distant, shimmering outline of the town walls. She stumbled once on a loose stone, her balance wavering. But she caught herself without breaking stride, her momentum carrying her forward with renewed force. The silence of the desert was left behind, replaced by the rush of wind in her ears. She was a blur of motion against the barren landscape, a herald driven by a singular, burning necessity. The marketplace of Sychar loomed ahead, a place of whispers and judgment, but she did not care. She skidded to a halt at the edge of the central square. The marketplace was a cacophony of commerce, but she cut through the noise like a blade. A merchant paused, his hand hovering over a scale, as she planted her feet in the center of the thoroughfare. She did not lower her eyes. She did not shrink. She shouted, her voice ringing clear against the stone walls. "Come and see!" The words hung in the air, sudden and sharp. A group of children stopped their game. A woman carrying grain set her basket down with a heavy thud. The rhythmic clatter of the market faltered and died. They stared at her, their faces etched with the usual lines of suspicion and cold distance. She stood her ground, chest heaving, pointing back toward the path she had just traveled. "A man is there!" she cried. "He told me everything I have ever done!" A ripple of movement passed through the crowd. The skepticism in their eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden, sharp curiosity. One man stepped forward, then another. The wall of judgment began to crumble. They were no longer looking away. They were looking at her. And for the first time, they were listening. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. Then, the first villager stepped out from the shade of the stalls, followed by a second, then a dozen more. The marketplace, once a place of rigid boundaries, became a river of people flowing toward the city gates. The sound of hundreds of sandals slapping against the hard-packed earth created a new, rhythmic pulse that echoed off the stone walls. She walked at the front, no longer a pariah, but a guide. The dust kicked up by the crowd swirled around them, turning the afternoon light into a hazy golden veil. They moved past the familiar landmarks that had once defined her exclusion, the well-worn corners where she had been ignored, the alleys where she had been avoided. Now, those spaces were empty. The entire weight of the town's attention was fixed on the path ahead. A man near the back stumbled, but he pushed forward. The distance to the well, once a journey of lonely exile, was now a shared pilgrimage. Every step they took together erased a year of her solitude. The woman looked back, seeing the sea of faces behind her, and felt the last remnants of her old life fall away. They were coming. They were finally coming to see. The procession slowed as the limestone rim of the well came into view. The crowd bunched together, a dense mass of bodies shifting and murmuring, but as they reached the clearing, they stopped. The woman moved to the center. She did not retreat to the shadows or look to the ground. She stood firm, her feet planted on the dry earth, acting as the anchor between the people of Sychar and the man waiting by the water. The air here was different still, heavy with the scent of deep, cool moisture. She looked at the villagers, then turned to the traveler, her presence steady and unyielding. The shame that had once defined her had vanished, replaced by the weight of her testimony. She was no longer a woman defined by whispers. She was the bridge. A silence fell over the group, deeper than the market's sudden quiet. She watched as the villagers took their first tentative steps forward, their eyes shifting from her to the man who sat with such quiet authority. The sun began its slow descent, casting long amber shadows across the limestone clearing. The harsh glare of the noon heat had vanished, replaced by a soft, golden radiance that seemed to cling to the faces of the crowd. The villagers stood in a loose semicircle, their initial posture of defensive judgment softening. Shoulders dropped, hands that had been clenched at their sides relaxed. They looked at the traveler, and the air between them seemed to vibrate with a new, quiet energy. There was no confrontation, no demand for answers, only the steady, rhythmic sound of collective breathing. A child reached out to touch the cool stone of the well, and the movement drew the eyes of the elders, who did not scold, but watched with a strange, numinous stillness. The traveler looked up, his gaze sweeping across the assembly, and the tension that had held the town in a grip of exclusion for years simply dissolved. It was as if the light itself had scrubbed the bitterness from the air. Where there had been whispers, there was now a shared, breathless silence. The well was no longer a place of solitary labor or social avoidance. It had become the center of a new, quiet gravity. The villagers moved closer, the distance between them closing until they stood shoulder to shoulder, their previous divisions erased by the simple act of gathering. The woman remained at the heart of this circle, her presence no longer a point of contention but a foundation for their shared experience. She looked at the stone rim, worn smooth by generations of hands, and saw it now as a threshold rather than a boundary. The water below, once a hidden resource for the few, was now a symbol of the belonging they all shared. She felt the weight of her own history fall away, not into the dark, but into the light that now filled the entire clearing. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and the promise of something deeper than thirst. She looked at the faces around her. The same eyes that had once turned away now met hers with recognition. The isolation that had defined her life had been transmuted into a connection that held them all. She stood in the center, a witness to the transformation of a lonely landmark into a fountain. The golden light of the afternoon eventually gives way to the deep, cooling shadows of dusk. The crowd disperses, carrying the quiet hum of a new understanding back into the narrow alleys of Sychar. Yet, the well remains. It stands as a silent witness to the moment a life was turned toward the light. We are left with the echo of that encounter, a ripple in the stillness that refuses to fade. If he could see her, if he could reach through the layers of her history to find the person beneath the shame, then what of us? What parts of our own stories are still kept in the dark, hidden away from the reach of grace? The water is still there, waiting. The light is still falling, searching for the places we have deemed unworthy of being known. We are left to wonder, are we ready to step out of the shadows and bring our own stories into the light of that same living water?